Hi everyone, it's Jennifer from Fiberflex. Welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to learn how to crochet this super easy and gorgeous corner-to-corner granny stripe baby blanket. The granny stripe is so super popular right now, and I made it into a baby blanket. I actually have been working on this for a while, so I'm really excited to share this with you. This just takes 2 yarn cakes and it can be stitched up really fast if you need a quick gift for like a baby shower or you need to make a couple blankets to have on hand. This is made starting at the, let me just flip it around here, starting at the bottom point, and then we're going to work our way up to make like a triangle, and then we're going to work our way inward, and then it will create this gorgeous square that the stripe is at an angle, okay? And we're going to be, like I said, using 2 yarn cakes, so all the color work will be done for you. The colors will change on their own, and it's just a really fun, satisfying, and relaxing project. So we're going to jump in, talk about supplies, but before we do that, I want to just share with you the ways you can get this pattern. So we're going to go through this blanket together, stitch by stitch and step by step today, but you can also get the full written pattern for free over at the Fiberflex blog. You can get the ad-free PDF over in my Ravelry and Etsy shops, and you can also join our Patreon community, and it's like a monthly subscription and you get the month's patterns over there. So that's a fun place to hang out too. All the links to everything I mentioned is below, and let's hop over and talk about supplies next. For this project, you'll need a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle. A tape measure is super helpful, especially if you want to kind of change up the sizing of your blanket a little bit. We're going to be using a 5mm H crochet hook. And let's talk about this yarn. I have 2 beautiful yarn cakes here. This is called Horizon from Hobie. This is a number 3 light on the yarn weight scale. It's a self-striping, beautiful color changes, and I'm going to use 2 cakes of this. Now each cake of this is 601 yards, so I'm going to use a total of 1,202 yards for this project. We're going to keep things really simple with this. We're going to use, when we do our corner-to-corner granny, we're going to start at the bottom point, work upward for the first part, and then for the second part, bring it back in and work back to a point. So we're going to make half the blanket with 1 cake and half the blanket with the other cake. Now, if you need to substitute yarn or you had another yarn in mind, just look for 1,202 yards of a number 3 light that recommends this 5mm H hook, and you'll be just fine. And when you're doing your project, if you're not using the same cakes as me, just save half the yarn for the first part and half the yarn for the second part. So we'll keep it very simple with how to use your yarn, okay? Now this, again, this is called Horizon from Hobie. This color is actually called Sunset. It's color number 2, and it does come in dye lots. So if you're using this particular yarn, just look at your dye lots and make sure the 2 numbers on your dye lots match, which mine do. That way you'll get the most consistent color changes, and you won't have anything dramatic when you're going from one cake to the next cake, okay? So we got all of our supplies and we're ready to go. I went into my yarn cake and I pulled from the center. If you can't find the center, or if it's kind of a problem, you can always pull from the outside of your cake as well if you need to. It's either way is fine. Okay, so we want to start with our increase portion. So like I mentioned before, we're going to start at the bottom point and work outward and kind of make a triangle. And then halfway through, we're going to come back in, okay? So what we want to do first is put a slip knot on our hook. So we're going to begin by wrapping the yarn around your fingers to make a loop. Bring the yarn behind that loop, reach in with your hook, bring up a loop, and tighten. Then what we're going to do is we're going to chain 6. To make a chain, wrap the yarn around the hook and bring it through the loop. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then what we're going to do, I'm going to just zoom in a little tiny bit, is we're going to work a slip stitch into the farthest chain from our hook to create a ring. So go down to that first chain that you made down here, insert the hook into that farthest chain, bring up a loop. Now you're going to bring that loop through the loop that's already on your hook, and we have a chain of a ring that we made with our chains rather. Okay, and then also what I like to do is just kind of hold this tail along the edge as I work, and that'll weave that in as you go along as well. Okay, so for row 1, what we're going to do is chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this chain 4 is going to count as a double crochet chain 1, and that'll make more sense as we move along. So then what we'll do is we're going to work 3 double crochets into the center of the ring. So to make a double crochet, wrap yarn around hook, insert it into that ring, bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops, wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the last 2 loops. So that's 1 double crochet and 2 double crochet and 3 double crochet, just like that. Then what we'll do is chain 1 and work a double crochet into the center of the ring once again. Okay, so now you see why that chain 4 makes sense as a double crochet chain 1, because we also have that at the end here as well. Okay, so this is going to be like the bottom corner of the blanket. Okay, so let's move on to row 2. For row 2, what we'll do is chain 4 once again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to turn our work. Now, keeping this little tail here, even if we want to tighten it up and kind of close up that ring a little bit, keeping that tail intact, don't weave that in yet, because when you turn your work, always point that tail towards you and your work is always kind of in the right spot, okay? So I kind of leave that tail in place the whole time. Okay, so we did a chain 4, we turned our work, and then in this first chain 1 space of the row, what we're going to do is we're going to work 3 double crochet, 1, 2, 3, all in that chain 1 space. And then we're going to chain 1. Then we're going to skip over this grouping of 3 double crochets here. And we're going to go to that space at the end of the row. And what we'll do is we'll work 3 double crochet, 1, 2, 3, then chain 1, and then 1 more double crochet, all in that same space, okay? So it's starting to look like a little triangle, okay? Let's move on to row 3. For row 3, this is actually going to be the row that you'll repeat for the whole first part, okay? So this is part 1, the whole first part of this. So for row 3, what we'll do is chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to turn our work. Using that little tail, you can use it to flip it over, and look, now it's pointing towards you. It's, you know, it's in the right spot. Okay, now in that first chain 1 space here at the end, we're going to do 3 double crochet, 1, 2, and 3, and chain 1. Then we're going to hop over this grouping of 3 double crochets and go into that next chain 1 space and do the same thing. 3 double crochet, 1, 2, 3, and chain 1. Then we're going to go into that last chain 1 space of the row. So down here at the end, and we're going to work 3 double crochet into that space. 1, 2, 3, chain 1, and 1 more double crochet into that space. Okay, so row 3 is complete. Okay, so we're off to a great start. So what you're going to do to finish up the rest of part 1, okay, and this whole yarn cake here, so what, or half your yarn if you're using different yarn. So what we're going to do is repeat row 3 until our triangle is about half the size you want your blanket to be. Okay, so we're gonna, when we bring it back in for part 2, it'll come across and to a point this way, so it'll make a square. Okay, so it's almost like a square cut in half, like how you would cut a sandwich diagonally or something like that. Okay, so just repeat row 3 over and over and over until your triangle is half the size you want your square blanket to be. Okay, or you've used half your yarn, or if you're using the cake like I am, you've used half of your cake. Now let me zoom out so we can look at our cake some more. It's so pretty. So what we're gonna do is keep repeating row 3 over and over and over, and then when we get back, we'll learn how to start bringing it back in. One really important thing I want to mention here is to make sure the number of the rows for your increase is an even number before you start to decrease for part 2. When we rejoin and start to learn how to decrease, make sure the number of rows is an even number. So if I was making a little tiny blanket, I wouldn't be able to start decreasing yet because I have an odd number of rows. We did row 1, row 2, row 3. You want an even number of rows total before you start to move on to part 2, okay? So let's keep going with row 3 over and over and over. And when we rejoin and have an even row of numbers, we'll finish up our part 1, our increase, and start working on our decrease for part 2, okay? So keep working row 3 and we'll rejoin in just a minute. Okay, we're just coming up to the end of the row here. I'm working that last stitch or 2 of the row, and I have just a little bit of yarn left. So I just kept working increase rows until I ran out of yarn basically. Now, like I mentioned before, you want to end your rows on an even number, okay? So I have 52 rows here, and I will give you a tip. Here's a little tip, and I'll also put this in the written pattern. If you're having trouble every time you do a row, counting and recounting and recounting and recounting as you go along, that can be extremely frustrating. So what I do is I throw a stitch marker in there on an even row. So wherever I have done that and worked my way up, see, I have one here. This was the 50th row. So I knew if I worked 2 more rows, it was 52 rows. And I didn't have to keep counting the entire thing. I could just count from where the stitch marker was up. Okay, and I knew I was always on an even row if that stitch marker, or the stitch marker marked an even row rather. Okay, so just a little tip so you don't have to like recount the whole thing every time you do a row. Okay, or you could just jot it down. It's up to you. You could say, after you do each row, you could be like 50, 51, 52, and do it that way too, okay? There's no reason to count every single time over and over and over and over again, okay? So just a little tip there. Okay, so we are done increasing. Now it's actually going to be like this. This is going to be the bottom corner of our blanket. This will be the other bottom corner of our blanket. So now we're going to start coming in this way, okay? So that means we need to work our rows a little bit differently as we move along. So what we want to do is, I'm going to zoom in because we're going to start and end our row a little differently. We're going to do the middle of the row exactly the same, so we'll have the same granny look, but we're going to start and end our row a little bit differently, okay? So what we want to do is, on the written pattern, there is a decrease row, okay? So for our decrease row, we're just going to repeat that same row over and over and over again until the second half of our blanket is complete, okay? So what we want to do for our decrease row is we're going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to turn our work, okay? Now, I've went ahead and grabbed our second yarn cake. I've already started the yarn, so that way when we get to the end here, what you can do, and let me just find the end. Here it is. Okay, so what you can do is just kind of tie these two together, leaving enough of a tail, and you can weave those in later, okay? So I'm just going to tie those on right now so we can just continuously crochet without interruption, okay? Okay, so we did a chain 4 and we turned our work. Then what we're going to do is we're going to skip this first chain 1 space, okay? So see that space, how it's like the double crochet and then the space and then 3 double crochet? We're going to skip that first space, and then we're going to go over to the next space here. So that's actually in between these 2 groupings of double crochets. And what we're going to do in there is work 3 double crochet, chain 1. Okay, so let me just come in a little closer here. So in that next space, we're going to skip that first space, and in the next space, we're going to work 3 double crochet, 1, 2, and 3, and then a chain 1. And we're going to do that in every space across until we get towards the end of the row, and I'm going to show you how to finish the row, okay? So as you can see already, it's sort of rounding in, so that we just made the next corner of our blanket, okay? So let's do a couple together. In the next space, 3 double crochet, 1, 2, 3, chain 1. And I'm going a little bit faster because we've already done this in each space so far. So this part will seem like a refresher. So next space, 3 double crochet, chain 1. Next space, 3 double crochet, 1, 2, 3, and chain 1. So keep repeating this all the way across in every space. And then when we get towards the end of our decrease row, we can take this out now because we've already counted our rows. But when we get to the end of this decrease row, towards the end, I'm going to show you how to finish off the row 2, and then you'll just be able to repeat this row over and over until your blanket is almost complete. Okay, we're coming up to the end of the row here. I have one more space in between these last 2 groupings of double crochets, and then we have our turning chain space. So in this next space, the one in between the 2 groupings, we're going to work 3 double crochet, 1, 2, 3, and a chain 1. So that'll be the last 3 double crochet chain 1 that we'll be doing. Now in the turning chain space, instead of working stitches into this time, what we're going to do for this one is we're going to work a double crochet into the top chain of the turning chain, okay? And that's all we'll do. So look at your turning chain and locate the topmost chain of that, and then we're going to work just a double crochet into that, okay? And that's it. That's all we'll do to finish up the row, okay? And on this side, we'll start to get, as you can see already, let me just lay it down so you can see, we're starting to get, it's rounding over the other way now. So we have 2 points at either end now that are coming back in, okay? So what you're going to do is repeat this row that we just did, this decrease row, over and over and over again until our triangle starts to come back in. And when we get almost to the end, before we get to that last point at the top, we'll rejoin and we'll kind of finish it up together. So keep repeating this decrease row over and over and over. If you need to hit the slow-mo feature on YouTube or back up the video, go ahead and do that. But we will rejoin in just a minute when we've worked all the way almost to the other point, okay? So go ahead and repeat that row and we'll rejoin in just a minute. Okay, we are finishing up the second to last row, and now we're ready to start the very last row. So as you can see, I have 2 little clusters here. So we're going to just start the row like normal. 1, 2, 3, 4 chains, turn our work. And then we're just going to work it the same way we did, but there's just 1 space here, okay? So work your 3 double crochet, 1, 2, and 3. Then your chain 1. And then work a double crochet into that turning chain space. And now our blanket is complete. So all we're going to do is just give our yarn a little trim, wrap the yarn around your hook, bring it through that last loop and pull it all the way through. And then grab your tapestry needle because we're going to just weave in some ends, okay? So you can see how our blanket is displaying all these gorgeous colors, and just locate. If you, we did 2 yarn cakes for this, but if you did more, you might have some more there. We're going to slide this up. Okay, so with your tapestry needle, if you need to give the tail a little bit of a twist and thread the needle, and then we're just going to thread it in there. So go in one direction with your needle, and then we're going to come back in the other direction, just like that. Just to kind of lock that tail into place and then give it a little trim, okay? Now repeat for all of your other tails. There should be one where you rejoined any balls of yarn, where you started, where you ended, okay? So our ends are all woven in and our blanket looks absolutely beautiful. I love the diagonal granny stripes. So that is how you crochet a super easy baby blanket. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiberflex video updates. Thanks again.